I have started noticing how many people are overweight. I'd never noticed, and I was one of them. I'll be the first to say I was one of them. I look around, and it is amazing, and I've read statistics lately about the growing population, literally growing population of obese people.
Hi, I'm Maria, otherwise known as the Fit Foodie. I'm a chef, holistic nutritionist, author, inventor, and mom. And I want to welcome you to my podcast. It's called Recipes for Your Best Life. And with every episode, I'm peeling back the onion on fitness, nutrition, health, wellness, and family. The truth is, you're the chef of your life. And for every important pillar, there's a great recipe worth sharing. So every week, we'll explore them together. Think of it as food for thought that you can really sink your teeth into. So join me, and let's squeeze the joy out of this life, because you only get one. Can I get a fork, yeah? What happens when a health scare prompts a family intervention? Well, this is exactly what occurred to Rich Everett. Rich is a former news director, reporter, and anchor, and he's a 30-year veteran of the broadcast news business. He's interviewed everybody that you can imagine, including all of the living presidents, celebrities across the gamut. And he comes from a very hectic lifestyle, one where he was smoking 3 packs of cigarettes a day. Yes, 3 packs a day, and eating a lot of unhealthy food. And then when he went to the doctor and found that his health was hanging on by a thread, his family decided to jump in. And what happened after they did that intervention is pretty incredible. You're going to learn all about that in this episode of Recipes for Your Best Life. And if you think it's too late, it's never too late. Rich is 64, and his life completely turned around within 6 months. Get ready to be inspired. Rich, it's so great to be on with you today. Thanks for making time for us.
Happy to be here.
So we met by way of, kind of the industry that we live in, and your background in the broadcast world is pretty extensive. Can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, I started, way back in the dark ages in 1972 in radio, and eventually made the transition from radio into television. And in television, I started, as so many do, as what we now call an MMJ, a multimedia journalist. Although back then, there was not much multimedia, but what that meant back then was what we would call back then a one-man band. You shot your own material, you did your own reporting, you did it all by yourself. And then I, like so many, I kind of worked my way up through the ranks, became a reporter, eventually became an anchor, eventually became a news director and ran news operations. And all that took, since 72 to 2004. And in 2004, I got this idea that there should be a company that didn't exist. And so I decided that I would leave the day-to-day TV news business and start that company. And that company is called Talent Tapes. And that was back in the days when we actually used tape. We don't use tape anymore. And a demo reel was called a talent tape. In the music industry, I knew people in the music industry in Nashville, and that's where I got the idea. If you want to be a big country music singer, you make a demo, and you take it to the record company, and they listen to it, and they go, yes, we will make you a star. And there are companies that the musicians can go to that will help them produce those demos. Well, in the TV news business, it's the same thing. You have to take a demo of your work to the TV station to try to get that anchor job or that reporter job. But there was nobody that had a business that you could turn to and say, help me figure out how to do that. Everybody was kind of left with their own devices.
Right.
And I thought, from having watched as a news director millions and millions of talent tapes, I realized that there were people who were great journalists who could put together a great story that had not one clue what news directors were looking for on a demo reel. So I started the company Talent Tapes to provide that service.
Yeah,
And that was, gosh, it's been 15 years now, and we're still going strong.
I love it. But
And I'm
from the
just
minute, I
pleased
have to
that
say, from the
we've been
minute
able
that
to help so many people.
oh yeah. Well, but from the minute that I heard your voice over the phone, I was like, this is an iconic voice. I mean, this is like a radio voice personified. Where would maybe we have heard you, that voice? Because it's so perfect.
Well, along the way, you know how it is in our business. You start off in the little tiny markets and work your way up. I tell people it's kind of like being a professional baseball player, starting in the minor leagues and eventually trying to get to the major leagues.
Oh
And
yeah.
I have worked in I have worked in places as small as, I guess, Hattiesburg, Mississippi was the smallest of them, all the way up to New York City and many stops along the way. I was in Chattanooga for a long time. Myrtle Beach, South Carolina for a while, Scranton, Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania for a while. You once again, to use the baseball analogy, you hit the ball and you touch them all. Try to score.
Well, when you really like kind of done everything in your world, in your industry, what part, before starting your company, and I want to talk a little bit more about Talent Tapes, but before you decided to make that transition, what was the day-to-day life of a broadcast journalist like? I mean, I can only imagine it was pretty hectic.
Well, if you're like me, and I'm a naturally curious person, it was the greatest thing ever, because every day you get to go learn something new. Whatever's going on in the world, that's the most interesting thing out there. That's what you're going to spend your day learning about, and then you get to come back and tell everybody else about it. So it was just a wonderful career for me to be a reporter. And along the way, you get to do everything. I have flown with the Blue Angels and the Thunderbirds. I've ridden in the four-man bobsled with the Olympic bobsledders.
Wow.
I've interviewed every president from Jimmy Carter up to George Bush. You do everything. I've covered riots. I've covered wars. There's not much in life after doing it, for nearly 40 years that you haven't, seen firsthand. And that's what I wanted. That's what I wanted with my life. I did not want to live a boring life. And I assure you, being a reporter all those years, it is not boring.
I can only imagine. And you named off some pretty famous people. What was let's start with your favorite interview and maybe your more challenging one.
You know what? You're not going to believe this. My favorite, people ask me that pretty frequently, and they're always surprised by the answer. All the famous people were not my favorite interviews. Only because they're professionals at being interviewed. That's what they do. They get interviewed. My very favorite interviews, and there were a handful of them, were ordinary people in extraordinary circumstances. I remember years ago, I was in Tennessee, and I'd been sent to cover a bus accident. A bus had gone over one of the mountains in Tennessee. By the time we got there, it was all over. Everybody was gone. And so my videographer was just getting some video of the area. And I turned around, and an older guy, had walked up, just what you would think of up in the hollers of Tennessee, wearing overalls and a straw hat. It looked like he was right out of Central Casting. And he and I started talking. He just lived up in that area and had walked down to see what all the fuss was about. And as I talked to him, he started telling me the story of his life, that he had grown up there in the mountains of Tennessee, and his parents and grandparents had, and now his daughter lived over in the other holler over there, and his son lived down the road and on that mountain over there. And he was just a wonderful, normal human being. And I thought, this guy is much more interesting than anything we've got planned to be in our show tonight. This is the guy that we should be spending 30 minutes with this evening. Just telling the real stories of real people was what I enjoyed most about my time in the news business.
I love that. And what was maybe one of your most challenging with that, have been a famous person?
I guess the most challenging, there were Yeah, on a fairly regular basis. It's challenging. And I will just tell you, just as a blanket statement, all the politicians are challenging. All of them.
Dude, I thought we were going to get some dirt today.
Well, I'll just, as a blanket statement, throw dirt on all of them as far as being interesting interviews. They are just so well practiced at not answering your question. And it was a daily frustration trying to deal with the politicians. So, those would be the toughest of them all.
Yeah, the media dance.
Yeah.
So leading into, your vast experience in broadcast, you interviewed them all, you saw them all. What was your day-to-day lifestyle like then? I can only imagine being so hectic and, hard to kind of just keep things straight, let alone take care of yourself. I mean, was it hard to do, or, what kind of routines did you fall into? I'm just curious what that kind of lifestyle looks like.
Yeah, it's a little different from a normal office job. One of the things that I learned was I always kept a bag packed under my desk, because you just never knew at any moment that they were going to say, "Hey, Rich, we need you in a different city, and you got to stay there for the next 2 weeks, and you better hurry right now."
Sure.
Years ago, I was, and here's just an example of how that kind of thing can happen. Many, many years ago, when I was sort of still starting out, we had gotten a call one day that I was going to be going to Atlanta to cover something at the legislature there. And there was a prison riot at the federal prison. So they diverted me off the story I was on over to go see what was happening at the federal prison there. And it turned out to be not only a prison riot, but a siege. The prisoners actually took over the federal prison in Atlanta. This was just before Thanksgiving of that year. I remember that because I missed Thanksgiving and Christmas.
Oh,
all of a sudden, I was supposed to have a fairly normal day covering something at the state capitol, and got diverted over to this. And I literally stayed in a tent outside the federal prison in Atlanta for a number of weeks as the siege continued. And not only that, but in addition to reporting from my local station, we got picked up by the network. And so we were reporting for all of the network ABC affiliates around the country during that as well. When I woke up that first morning, in my wildest dreams, I would never have guessed that's how my day in the next few weeks were going to turn out. But that's kind of what you have to be prepared for if you're in the TV news business. You just never know on a daily basis what's going to be happening.
So what about like a health routine, from eating to exercise? I mean, was that something that you found yourself doing? Or
no. No. And to give you an example, when I was 30 years old, the director of the show that I was on, he was 30 years old also. He had a heart attack that year, and I was hospitalized with ulcers that year.
Oh, wow.
And it was strictly related to the pressures of the job. And when I was put in the hospital with ulcers, my doctor, and they were a little concerned about my heart at the same time. And my doctor was kind of interviewing me in the hospital. I said, "Now, Rich, now tell me about your lifestyle a little bit." And I said, "Well, I'm a reporter for TV." He goes, "Deadline pressure?" Well, yeah, every day. He said, "Do you smoke?" I said, 3 packs a day. Just do you drink?
Wow.
I said, every night after work. We all do. Well, do you get any rest? Yeah, 4 or 5 hours a night, and then I'm back at it again. He says, "Well, I can't imagine why you're having ulcers and may have a heart problem here." And that was my first indication at the age of 30 that, I might ought to start thinking about a little bit of a different lifestyle. But it took me about 30 more years to do much. I did quit smoking right then, as a matter of fact.
Yeah.
And I would encourage, this is the only thing that I will say today that I will encourage everybody to do. Quit smoking. If you smoke, it's just not a good thing. I can't find any good reason to smoke.
Amen.
So I did quit smoking at that point. But then, for the next 30 years, I was still working in the TV news business for the most part. And, you eat Big Macs on the run every day with a large Coke. And the next thing I knew, I'd ballooned up to, I don't know how much I eventually weighed. I quit getting on the scales at 250. But I continued the ascent for a few more months before I did anything about it. So, yeah. Eventually, it all catches up with you as it did with me.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. I can only